So as a little child, I spent a lot of time around those people in the garden, saw how they enjoyed those spaces and decided I must make a garden for myself. I found a strip of ground behind the garage. Very barren, dry bit of ground, but never you mind. I was all of 4 years old, and I made my garden there. I planted a banana skin. Bananas were very, very scarce in the Western Cape in those days before refrigerated trucks, and I figured it would be really nice to have bananas. So I confessed to my grandfather in his garden, said to him, I also have a garden, and I told him what I had planted. My grandpa put me on the garden bench next to him. He lit his pipe, and he didn't tell me that it's not going to work. He just said to me, maybe you should do some seed sowing as well. Let's try that too. So, grandfather helped me make a little furrow. He guided my hand in sowing the seeds. We covered the seeds, watered it, and after about a week, he fetched me and showed me the row with the little seedlings emerging. I was smitten. I was mesmerized. This was too wonderful. We kept watering, kept looking after it. These little things were growing. I had no idea what I had planted. It was just growing, and that was wonderful. And then came a day when my grandpa fetched me again. He said we must scratch around the soil a bit, and he said, pull up the plant. And I pulled out a radish. He parked me on the bench next to him. He hauled out a salt cellar, and he showed me how to eat a radish. Now that radish burned, but my grandpa loved radishes, so they had to be good. There was no way they weren't good, and I grew it myself. From that day onward, I was growing things. I have since done better with a changed approach to bananas. Those we cut in the garden this morning. And radishes are still very much part of my garden. My garden, when we moved to Stanford in 1986, it was spring. I didn't know what I was going to do in Stanford, but I knew I wanted to plant a garden. After plants in pots on windowsills, in apartments, in Vredehoek, and on balconies and so forth, I was faced with a half-acre plot, and it was daunting. It was full of kikuyu. Nobody had gardened there for many a year, a good thing because the soil was clean then, no poisons used in it. And I realized I'm going to need help. I looked at the gardens of people, of the neighbors. There were many pristine vegetable gardens in Stanford at the time. But when I spoke to those gardeners, I was very, very disappointed because they pointed me in the direction of the agri to get noxious potions to kill insects and to get rid of pests. Sorry. And I wanted to go the organic way. So I realized I was on my own with that. I battled and furiously protected my seedlings with garlic and chili sprays. And I am a murderer of snails. I stopped on snails at night. The neighbors who weren't so enamored with us, they called us inkommers, that you new to the area, looked at this lot over the fence line. Here's this woman, drunk in the moonlight, because I do a kind of goose-stepping with a torch, trying to find all these snails. 2 Irish terriers following me, so I bumped because I missed a snail right there, bumped the dogs, and they were not happy with this, but there was little they could do. And I would go back home. And Peter the first night said to me, well, this is all very well and fine. It's now 9 o'clock. You've killed a whole lot of snails now. But what happens about those that come sliding along at 3 o'clock when you're fast asleep? But Mother Nature does give one a break. Snails have very nasty habits. They're cannibals. So they rather eat their brothers than eat your pumpkin seedlings if you leave a line for them. Now in spring, we take things from the garden to the kitchen. And the spring foods are light. They have such a lightness of being that I think there's very little to be done to them. In fact, we are at the end of spring. Here are some of the broad beans out of our garden. I eat most of the broad beans that I eat just like this. Take one, please pass around, and just open the pod. Take the beans out of that furry little bed. Pull off the skin and pop the emerald in your mouth. Same goes for dairy produce. Because of the feed, lovely spring grasses, the dairy products are also very, very light and beautiful. Perfect time now to be making all those soft cheeses. Peter, how are you doing there? I've made some, Visitor made some full cream ricotta, which we made just with milk and cream and used lemon juice with it. The lightest dressing, a little bit of salt and a few snips of chives is what I use with that. Spring turns to summer in the garden. My first summer in the garden, I learned something that I didn't know about myself. I'm a gambler. I've never set foot in a casino, but I gamble almost on a daily basis. Because you see, I plant by sowing seed mostly. Sometimes seedlings, trade seedlings from somebody else or buy seedlings, but mostly sowing. And sowing is a real gamble. You can get all or nothing. And after 30 years of doing that, I'm still happy sowing. I am delighted when luck turns my way. And I've sown a row of basil seeds, and up comes basil seedlings. I still marvel at the fact that basil knows that it should be basil. I like playing. But when summer crops bear, they bear profusely. After our first spring garden just rushed at me, I had baskets of tomatoes sitting around. There were green beans, never mind those baby marrows. Who's planted baby marrows? You know how fast. You go. And then those bushes of basil. I realized we weren't going to use all of this. I had to do something with it. And I couldn't give any to our neighbors, because if I gave Tani Hina, my next door neighbor, a basket of tomatoes, she would hit back 2 days later with 2 baskets of green beans. So the answer was to start selling it. So in 1989, we started selling at the market in Marianas, the food market, which was at the Old Harbour. Firstly, only vegetables, and then we started augmenting, because during the week the vegetables were ready, and you know those ones with a hikey here and there. People want perfect things, unfortunately, and something had to be done with those. So what do? We turn to pickling and preserving. Now in those days, pickling and preserving was not nearly as trendy as it is now. It was only pursued by old ladies with smelly dogs and memories. And I found most of my books on preserving in the Marianas animal welfare shop, because there weren't many on the shelves. But also, of course, those recipes that were handed down by the family. Now, I also learned about the waiting game with preserves. Preserves often, especially if you use brines and vinegars and that kind of thing, need to sit to mature properly and to come to their full beauty. But I also believe that one has to display the season on a plate. So when something is in season, you eat it fresh. The preserves are for later. I remember a conversation at that very market with somebody in December who said, "Have you got any strawberry jam?" I said, "Yes, I have, but I am not selling it now." I said, "You have to eat the fresh strawberries now. They're beautiful." She said, "When will you sell the strawberry jam?" I said, "After the first rains at Easter." Because when you open a pot of strawberry jam, then it brings back all the memories, the flavor of those hot, hot summer's days when those berries were at their peak. I have here one of my favorites, tomato jam, tomato and ginger jam. Unashamedly my mother's recipe. And this is what I wrote about my mother and her tomato jam. "I'm harvesting the last Roma tomatoes of the season, and my thoughts turn to my mother and tomato jam. My mother knew nothing of the famous Parisian chef Alain Passard, who served a tomato dessert which was made with 15 ingredients. But she was an alchemist who could turn 3 ingredients into tomate confit. She conjured up rows of ball jars filled with ruby red tomato jam, which we devoured with bread and cheese during the cold Cape winter. There's a little bit here for you to try if you want to do so later." Autumn kind of takes you by surprise. It's sort of still summer, but then suddenly you see, hang on, those plants that you left with some of the seeds intact, those seeds are ready, the birds are going for them. So you've got to quickly start gathering. Out comes then packets, brown paper packets, bags, box up, little tins, and we start saving our seeds for the next season, which means you have clean seeds, they're not poison treated, and the birds have some and we have some. In fact, we plant some crops for the birds. We plant sunflowers because we love sunflowers. Beautiful, big yellow heads of sunflowers. And when they become heavy with seed, they start drooping, turn over. And this is when the seed is ready for the birds. And they pull out those fat sunflower seeds from underneath. And the sunflower, the back of it, forms a perfect platform. A better bird feeder you can't get. They would perch up there and scruffle off the little husk and sit and eat their seeds there. Sometimes people, I can see, look at my garden and go, "You could have pulled that up. It wouldn't take a lot of effort," but they don't understand about those bird perchers often. And we also take some of our seeds into the kitchen. There's some coriander seed here. You know how quickly in summer, especially, the dania runs to seed. The flowers are beautiful to eat as well. And you, of course, save some for sowing later. But just take the dry seeds and cook with them. I've got some celery seed here, which is tiny, but they pack quite a punch. There's some fennel, so we use that in the garden as well. And then comes winter. A respite for all of us who garden. Winter in the Western Cape is benign for a gardener. You can take your eye off the ball a bit. With the rains, you won't lose too much. It's the time for contemplation, for sorting, for planning. It's the time when we start planting broad beans, those beans that you had were planted in June, July. And also, as I said, about a tidy garden, you take your eye off it a little bit. You don't clean and weed too heavily. Some years back, I sat talking to some of the Stanford gardeners, And there were amongst them people who were spraying their gardens with poisons. I wasn't. And they were all complaining about the fact that their broad beans were full of plant lice. I kept quiet because I was harvesting mine and they were fine, but I went and checked the next morning because we weren't so diligent with cleaning and weeding. There was a good stand of milkweed in amongst the broad beans. The broad beans were clear of the plant lice, but the milk thistle was full of it because it's a softer plant and a far easier target. So sometimes if somebody tells you that your garden isn't totally clean, just tell them that it makes sense from time to time not to have it so very well cleaned. And then winter, of course, is the time for citrus and citrus preserving. In winter, our kitchen is teamed up with the smell of citrus preserves. I was very lucky this year. I got a whole box of citrons. It's a very old-fashioned kind of citrus fruit. In Afrikaans, it's called a citter. And it's large, and you use the skin. It's got very thick white pith and very little by way of flesh inside. It's quite a process to make the citron preserve, but it really is worth the while. I'll let you try a little bit of that. So we move through the seasons, garden to kitchen, and seasons stretching out from one to the other. A chutney made in summer appearing on a plate of winter food. Some herebone in summer with leaves from the garden, but also olives that we preserved in May. Always that playing backwards and forwards, the sharing amongst the seasons, the sharing amongst gardeners. I've got a few seeds here for you. There's some rocket seed if you want to take a packet when you go. And also I've got loads of snowdrops at the moment. So there are some snowdrop bulbs if any of you would like to take some home with you and go and plant as gardeners share. Just want to leave you with this one thought too. About 2 weeks ago I spoke to a friend of ours who lives in Birmingham some part of the year. And we were speaking about seasons, and he said, when I live in Birmingham, I have no idea what season it is. I look outside as to whether I'm going to get wet, and am I going to get so wet that I should order a taxi or not. This is a strange concept for me, because my life is absolutely dictated, tuned to the seasons, and I think it makes for a very restful and interesting way of living.